The mother smirked. He loves her, not you. Leave him the house and the money. I've signed the divorce papers. She can have him. But the house and the money are mine. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know what city you're watching from. Please don't hesitate to share in the comments. And now, let me pull you into this story. My mother didn't even blink when she told me to give my husband to her. She just sliced into her steak, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Veronica, be reasonable. Barbara is carrying his child. He needs her more than he needs you." I froze. The fork in my hand suddenly felt as heavy as a lead weight. The air in the dining room of my parents' sprawling suburban house, usually filled with the scent of my mother's expensive peonies, now smelled chokingly of grilled meat and betrayal. I scanned the table. My father was staring into his glass of wine, avoiding my gaze. My sister, Barbara, was glowing. Her hand rested protectively on a slight bump in her belly that I hadn't noticed until 10 seconds ago. And Greg, my husband of 10 years, the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning and told me he loved me, was holding Barbara's other hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered. My voice sounded small and pathetic. It was the voice of the little girl who used to apologize for simply existing in this house. Greg finally looked at me. There was no guilt in his eyes. They were filled with defiance. "Veronica, please, don't make a scene," he said, using the condescending tone one uses with a hysterical child. "We didn't want to tell you like this, but we couldn't hide it anymore. Barbara is 4 months along. We're in love." I felt the blood drain from my face. 4 months. "You've been sleeping with my sister for 4 months, or longer?" Barbara interjected. She smirked. The slight, cruel twist of her lips that I knew so well. "It doesn't matter, Veronica. The timeline is irrelevant. What matters is that we're a family now. A real family. Something you obviously couldn't give him." The blow was precise. A direct hit on our struggles with infertility. The years of negative tests. The nights I'd cried in Greg's arms while he whispered that it didn't matter, that we were enough for each other. It was all a lie. I looked to my mother, Cynthia. Surely she would be furious. Surely she would slap Greg and throw him out, but she just took a sip of her wine. "Veronica, look at the facts. You're a career woman, always traveling, always obsessed with your company. You're strong. You can survive on your own. But Barb, she's fragile. She needs a provider. And that baby is my grandchild, my flesh and blood." "I'm your flesh and blood too," I snapped, my voice rising. "He's my husband." "Technically, my father," Arthur grumbled. He finally looked up. "But the marriage is effectively over, isn't it? You two have been drifting apart. We've all seen it. Greg is happy with Barbara. Look at them." I looked. They looked like a grotesque parody of a happy couple. My husband and my younger sister. Nausea rose in a powerful wave. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Sit down, Veronica," my mother commanded. "We need to discuss the arrangements. Greg can't just move into some rental. He needs stability for the baby. We think it's best if you move into the downtown apartment. Leave the house for Greg and Barbara. It's a good neighborhood, and it's close to us, so we can help with the baby." My jaw dropped. "You want me to move out of my own house? The house I bought. The house I pay the mortgage on." "It's Greg's house, too," my mother said dismissively. "Community property laws. Isn't that right? Anything acquired during the marriage is split 50-50. Besides, you have plenty of money. You can buy another one. Don't be greedy, Veronica. It's not a good look." Greedy. I paid for everything. I paid off my parents' car loan. I paid for Barbara's 3 failed attempts at a college degree. I paid for Greg's business ventures that never made a single dime. And now I was the greedy one for wanting to keep my own home. "I'm leaving," I said, grabbing my purse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the strap. "If you walk out that door," Greg said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative, "you'll be proving why I left you. You're cold. You care more about your assets than you do about a human life." "I care about loyalty," I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls. "I care that my husband is sleeping with my sister." "Hush," my mother hissed. "What will the neighbors think?" I looked at them one last time. A tableau of monsters. My parents, enabling betrayal. My sister, stealing my life. My husband, A traitor. I'm not giving you the house, I said, my voice trembling but clear. And I'm not giving you an uncontested divorce. You will, my mother said confidently, because if you don't, you will lose this family forever. Do the right thing, Veronica. Be the bigger sister for once. I turned and ran. I didn't look back at the warm glow of the dining room. I just needed air. I needed to get away before I shattered into a million pieces right there on their welcome mat. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to thank you for listening. If you're watching from New York City or any other city, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. The New York rain doesn't wash anything away. It just makes everything gray and slick. I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys. My vision was blurred, not just from the relentless drizzle, but from the hot, angry tears scalding my cheeks. I got inside. Into the sanctuary of the leather seats of the car I bought, I reminded myself bitterly and locked the doors. For a moment, I just sat there, gasping for air, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I started the engine and peeled out of the driveway, leaving behind the house where I had spent my entire life trying to be good enough. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. I got on the interstate, the wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the glass. My mind was racing, trying to find a loophole in reality. Maybe this was a joke, a sick, twisted prank. Maybe I would wake up in my bed next to Greg, and he'd be warm and smell like his cedarwood soap, and I'd tell him about this nightmare, and he'd laugh and hold me. But then the image of Barbara's hand on her stomach flashed in my mind. The smugness, the absolute lack of shame. This wasn't a nightmare, it was my life. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the city lights smearing into long neon streaks. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot at a scenic overlook, the city skyline glittering in the distance. I cut the engine and let the silence crush me. How? How could he? I replayed the last 4 months in my head, the late nights Greg spent at business meetings, the weekends he went to help his parents with renovations. He wasn't at his parents' house, he was at mine. He was with her. They had all been in on it. Every time I'd shown up for Sunday dinner, they were laughing at me behind my back. They were looking at me, the stupid woman working 80-hour weeks to fund their lifestyle and mocking my ignorance. I screamed. It was a raw, primal sound that tore from my throat. I pounded the steering wheel until my palms stung. I screamed for the 10 years I had wasted. I screamed for the baby I couldn't have and for the one she was carrying. Then the bargaining started. The pathetic, desperate bargaining of a woman in shock. Maybe we can fix this, a tiny, treacherous voice whispered in my head. Maybe if I agree to an open marriage? Maybe if I help raise the baby? No. I looked at the passenger seat. There was a crumpled receipt in the cup holder. I picked it up. It was from a jewelry store, dated 2 weeks ago. A charm bracelet. I didn't own a charm bracelet. Barbara did. I remembered seeing a new silver chain on her wrist at dinner. He had bought her jewelry with my money. The grief began to curdle into something colder. I remembered his vows for richer, for poorer. He definitely loved the for richer part. When we met, I was just a junior accountant, and he was an up-and-coming realtor. We were equals then. But while I climbed the corporate ladder, taking night classes, getting certifications, pushing for CFO, he stagnated, and instead of being proud, he grew resentful. "You're emasculating me," he'd said once during a fight about money. "You treat me like an employee." I'd apologize then. The next day, I transferred $1,000 into his personal account for him to invest in his consulting business, just to soothe his ego. I had been buying his love over and over again, and my parents. That hurt the most. Be the bigger sister. It was the mantra of my existence. Barb is sensitive, Veronica. Barb needs help, Veronica. You're the strong one. Being strong was just a euphemism for being used. They didn't love me for who I was. They loved me for what I provided. I was the family mule, carrying the heavy load so Barb could skip along unburdened. I looked at my phone. 5 missed calls from my mother. A text from Greg. "Stop being dramatic. Come back so we can discuss a move-out schedule." A move-out schedule. He was already planning how to arrange my furniture in his new life. I didn't reply. I started the car again. The tears had stopped. My eyes were dry and gritty, and there was a hollow ache in my chest that I knew would be there for a long time. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, the denial was gone. Reality was a cold, hard stone in my gut. They wanted a war. They wanted my house. They wanted my money. They thought I would fold because I always folded. They thought I was weak because I was kind. I drove home to my home not to pack, but to secure the perimeter. I wasn't going to a downtown apartment. I was going to sleep in my own bed, even if it smelled like him. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be a daughter or a wife. Tomorrow, I would be a CFO, and I was about to conduct an audit of their entire lives. To understand why I didn't just flip the table and burn the house down right then, you have to understand the hierarchy of the Miller family. I was the firstborn, healthy and robust. Barbara came 8 years later, premature and sickly. From the moment she arrived in an incubator, taking shallow breaths, she was the sun, and I was the shadow. It started small. "Be quiet, Veronica, the baby's sleeping. Give that toy to Barb, she's crying. You don't need new shoes, Veronica. Barb needs orthopedic inserts." I learned early on that my needs were secondary. My role was to facilitate Barbara's happiness. I remember my 16th birthday. I'd saved up all summer, babysitting and mowing lawns, to buy a car, a beat-up old sedan. My father had promised to match my savings if I got straight A's. I did. I proudly presented my report card and my jar of cash. My father looked at the jar, then at my mother. "Veronica, sweetie," my mom began, in that soft, pitying voice she used. "We have a situation. Barb needs braces, the expensive kind, and there's that dance camp coming up. We really can't spare the money right now." "But you promised," I said, my voice wavering. "Don't be selfish," my father snapped. "Your sister has self-esteem issues. Braces are a medical necessity. You can take the bus. It builds character." So I took the bus. Barb got her braces and her dance camp. She quit the camp after 2 days because it was too hard and the money was gone. I never got the matching funds. I bought that sedan entirely on my own 2 years later. This was the pattern. I worked. Barbara received. The worst incident, the one that should have warned me what she was capable of, happened at my senior prom. I had bought a beautiful emerald green dress. I'd worked double shifts at a diner to afford it. It hung in my closet, wrapped in plastic, a symbol of one night where I would get to be beautiful and special. 2 days before the prom, I came home to find Barbara, who was 10 at the time, in my room. She was wearing my dress. It was dragging on the floor, and she'd taken a pair of scissors and hacked at the hem because it was too long for her. She was twirling, playing princess. "What are you doing?" I shrieked. She stumbled. The scissors ripped a long gash right through the bodice. I cried. I literally fell to the floor and sobbed. My mother rushed in. When she saw the ruined dress and Barbara's guilty face, she didn't scold Barbara. She turned to me. "Veronica, you shouldn't have left it where she could get it. She's just a child. She wanted to be like her big sister." "She ruined it!" I screamed. "I can't wear it." "We can pin it," my mom said dismissively. "Stop overreacting. You're making Barb cry." And there it was. Barbara was crying fake, crocodile tears, and suddenly, I was the villain. I went to my prom in a borrowed dress that didn't fit right. Barb got ice cream to soothe her trauma from my yelling. That dynamic followed us into adulthood. I went to a state school on scholarships and loans. Barb went to a private university on my parents' dime. She dropped out, went to beauty school, dropped out, and then found herself in Europe for a year, financed by a credit card my father eventually asked me to help pay off because the interest is killing us. "Veronica, and you have such a fancy job now." I paid it. That's the sickness of being the shadow child. You think if you just pay enough, if you just solve enough problems, maybe they'll finally look at you with the same adoration they give the golden child. I thought I could buy their love. When I brought Greg into the family, I thought I finally had someone on my team. He saw how they treated me. "Your family is insane," he told me after our first Christmas, watching Barb open a mountain of gifts while I got a calendar and a pair of socks. "I'll take care of you, Veronica. With me, you'll never be second best." I clung to those words. I married him believing them. I didn't realize that Greg was essentially a male version of Barbara, insecure, entitled, and looking for a host. He didn't want to save me from my family dynamic, he wanted to slot right into it. He saw how generous I was, how I threw money at problems to make them go away, and he realized he'd hit the jackpot. So, when my mother said, at that dinner table, "Be the bigger sister," it triggered 3 decades of conditioning. But it also triggered 3 decades of suppressed rage. I wasn't 16 anymore. I didn't depend on them for shelter or love. I was a CFO. I managed millions of dollars. I fired incompetent people for a living. And as I sat in my house that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized my family was a bad investment, a toxic asset, and it was time to liquidate. The next morning, I woke up in a cold, empty bed. For a split second, I reached for Greg, a muscle memory expecting his warmth. Then reality crashed down like a physical blow. He wasn't there. He was probably with her. I dragged myself out of bed and walked into his home office, or rather, his gaming room that we called an office to preserve his dignity. When I met Greg, he was a realtor, not the most successful, but he had charm, he had potential. I was drawn to his easygoing nature, which balanced my intensity. He was the dreamer. It seemed like a good match. But as my career took off, his stagnated. I made partner at my firm, the market crashed, and he didn't sell a house for a year. "It's okay," I told him. "I make enough for both of us. Take a break. Figure out what you really want to do." That was my mistake. I gave him a cushion, and he decided to take a 5-year nap on it. He rebranded himself as a business consultant. It was a vague title that meant he spent all day on LinkedIn and message boards, occasionally meeting a buddy for lunch to workshop ideas that never materialized. He stopped contributing to the mortgage. Then he stopped paying utility bills. Then he stopped buying groceries. Slowly, insidiously, I became the sole provider. I didn't mind the money at first. I loved him, but I minded his attitude. The less he earned, the more arrogant he became. It was a defense mechanism. I knew. He felt small, so he had to act big. He started criticizing my spending. "Do you really need another designer suit, Veronica?" he'd ask, while wearing the $5,000 watch I bought him. "You're so materialistic. You work too much. You're losing touch with what's important." What was important, apparently, was him. I walked over to his desk. It was a mess of papers and unopened mail. I started sifting through it. A past due notice for a credit card I didn't know he had, a speeding ticket, and then a brochure for a luxury resort in Miami Beach. I froze. I recognized the resort. I had been there for a corporate retreat 6 months ago. Greg had stayed home because he had an important meeting. I went to my laptop and pulled up our joint account statement, the one I funded every month for household expenses. There it was, a charge for 2 plane tickets to Miami, the dates coinciding with my work trip, and a charge for a deluxe king room. He had taken her there. While I was in boardrooms closing the deals that paid for our life, he was drinking cocktails on the beach with my sister, on my dime. I felt sick. It wasn't just the sex. It was the financing of the betrayal. He had made me pay for my own humiliation. I kept digging. I looked at the cash withdrawals. $300 here, $200 there. Consulting expenses, he'd note in our budgeting app. But looking at the dates, August 12th, Barbara's birthday. September 5th, the day Barbara's car broke down. October 31st. He had been subsidizing her life for years, not months. Years. "You make me feel small," he'd told me at our last anniversary dinner, the real one, not last night's disaster. "You walk around like you own the place, just because you sign the checks." "I don't mean to," I'd replied, feeling guilty. "I just want us to be stable." "Stable isn't sexy, Veronica," he'd sneered. "Need is sexy. You don't need me." He was right. I didn't need him. But Barbara did. Barbara was a bottomless pit of need. She needed money. She needed validation. She needed someone to rescue her. Greg couldn't rescue himself, but he could pretend to rescue Barbara, using my resources. It was a parasitic symbiosis. He got to feel like a big man, and she got a free ride. I slammed the laptop shut. My sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a robbery. I looked around the room, at the things I had bought him. The top-of-the-line gaming computer, the ergonomic chair, the autographed Michael Jordan jersey on the wall. He was a leech, a handsome, charming, gaslighting leech, and he had made a fatal mistake. He thought because I was generous, I was stupid. He thought because I loved him, I wasn't checking the accounts. But I'm a CFO, I check everything. I heard the front door open downstairs. Heavy footsteps. He was here. I took a deep breath, straightened my clothes, and stood up. The weeping wife was gone. The auditor was in. Greg walked into the house like he owned it. He didn't look remorseful. He looked annoyed, like a man who had been inconvenienced by a tedious errand. Tucked under his arm was a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. "Veronica," he said, seeing me at the top of the stairs. "Glad you're here. We need to get this moving." I walked slowly down the stairs, my hand sliding along the banister I had sanded and stained myself 3 years ago. "Get what moving? Exactly?" "The transition," he said, dropping the boxes in the entryway. "Barb's hormones are all over the place. She's getting anxious. The baby can feel the stress, you know. We need to be settled here by the weekend so I can get the nursery ready." I stopped on the last step, looking him in the eye. "You will not be setting up a nursery in my house, Greg." He rolled his eyes. "Here we go. I told your mother you were going to be difficult. Look, Veronica, let's be adults about this. This house has 4 bedrooms. It's too big for one person. You're never here anyway. You live at the office. Barb and I are starting a family. We need the space. It's just logical." "Logical?" I let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "Logical would be you moving into an apartment you can afford, which, by my calculations, is a cardboard box under an overpass." His face darkened. The charm evaporated, revealing the malice underneath. "Don't you start with the money, Veronica. That's all you have, isn't it? Your money. You think it makes you better than everyone. It pays the mortgage," I said calmly. "Something you haven't done in 5 years." "I contributed in other ways," he yelled, his face turning red. "I managed the household. I took care of things. I provided you with emotional support." "You slept with my sister," I countered. "Is that emotional support?" "I slept with her because she appreciates me." He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "It used to work. It didn't today. She looks at me like a man, not a bank account. You pushed me away, Veronica. You were cold. You were distant. You were, for all intents and purposes, barren." The word hung in the air. Barren. He knew how much it hurt. He knew about the IVF shots, the hormones, the crushing devastation of every negative result. He was using my pain as a weapon to justify his betrayal. "I was trying to have your baby," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "I put my body through hell for you." "Yeah, well, it didn't work," he said cruelly, "and it did for Barb. Naturally, effortlessly. Maybe that's a sign, Veronica. Maybe we weren't meant to have kids. Maybe nature knew you weren't mother material." I felt as if a slap would have hurt less, but I didn't hit him. I just looked at him, memorizing this moment. This was the closure I needed. There was no love left here, only rot that needed to be cut out. "Pack your things," I said, my voice turning to ice. "Your personal effects, clothes, toiletries. You are not taking the electronics, you are not taking the furniture, and you are damn sure not taking the car." "The hell I'm not," he sneered. "This is marital property. I talked to a lawyer friend. Half of everything is mine, including this house. My retirement savings, well, yours since we're married," he smirked. "So you can do this the easy way. Sign the house over to me as part of the settlement, and I won't come after your 401. Or we can go to court, and I'll take half your precious company stock too. Your choice." He thought he had me in checkmate. He thought he knew the law. "Pack your clothes, Greg," I repeated. "You have 1 hour before I change the locks." "You can't change the locks. This is the marital home." "Actually," I said, checking my watch, "I can. But go ahead, call the police. I'd love to explain to them why my husband is trying to move his pregnant mistress, my sister, into my home." He stared at me, seeing that I wasn't backing down. He grabbed the boxes and stormed upstairs. I could hear him slamming drawers, throwing things around. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady now. He had just admitted his strategy: blackmail. He wanted to trade my retirement for the house. He wanted to bleed me dry to build a nest for Barbara. He didn't know about the LLC. He didn't know the house wasn't technically in my name or his. He didn't know the car was a company lease. He was playing checkers. I was playing 4D chess. 20 minutes later, I saw him dragging 3 suitcases downstairs. He had grabbed the PlayStation too. I let him have it. It was a small price to pay to be rid of him. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he spat as he walked out. "Don't think you've won. Mom and Dad are on my side. Everyone's on my side. You're going to end up a lonely, bitter old hag with nothing but your cats and your Excel spreadsheets." "Goodbye, Greg," I said. He slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I walked over and shot the deadbolt. Then I slid the chain lock into place. I was alone in the big, quiet house, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The peace, however, was short-lived. Greg didn't just leave. He went straight to Command Central, my parents' house, and activated the support network. Psychologists call them flying monkeys, the people a narcissist manipulates into tormenting their victim. My family was a whole air force of them. It started with a text alert on my phone about 10 minutes after Greg left, then another, then a flood. "Aunt Lydia, Veronica, I heard what happened. I am so disappointed in you, throwing the father of a pregnant woman out on the street. Where is your conscience? Cousin Mike, dude, just give Greg the house. You're rich, don't be a bitch." Even my grandmother, who could barely text, "Family helps family. Shame on you, Veronica." They had the narrative perfectly aligned. In their version, I was the vindictive rich wife punishing 2 star-crossed lovers. No one mentioned the adultery. No one mentioned the sisterly betrayal. It was all focused on the innocent baby and my selfishness. Then the email arrived. The subject line was simply, "The solution." It was from my father, with my mother, Greg, and Barbara CC'd. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened it. "Veronica, we are appalled by your behavior today. Kicking Greg out when he was trying to be civil was uncalled for. We need to settle this matter privately, without expensive lawyers who will only drain family resources. Here is the proposal we have agreed upon as a family. 1. You will immediately sign over the deed to the house on Maple Street to Greg and Barbara. This will provide stability for your future nephew, niece. 2. You will pay alimony to Greg for a period of 5 years, considering he sacrificed his career to support yours." I laughed out loud at this one. Sacrificed what? His high score in Call of Duty? 3. You will pay a one-time sum of $5,000 for the emotional distress caused to Barbara during this transition. 4. You will agree to a quick, no-fault divorce. In return, Greg will agree not to pursue his legal claim to 50% of your current company stock. This is a generous offer, Veronica. If you refuse, we will support Greg in a full-scale legal battle. We will testify that you were emotionally abusive and neglectful. Also, remember, you have a responsibility to this child. Do not punish an innocent baby for your jealousy. Love, Dad. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with rage. They wanted me to pay Barbara for emotional distress. They wanted me to pay alimony to the man who was stealing from me, and the threat they would testify against me. My own parents were willing to commit perjury to destroy me, just to prop up Barbara. It was breathtaking in its audacity. They were counting on my guilt. They were counting on my lifetime of trying to please them. They thought if they pushed hard enough, the old Veronica, the shadow sister, would break, just to make the yelling stop. I started typing a furious reply. "Are you insane? He cheated on me. She's my sister." But my finger hovered over the send button. No, this is what they wanted. They wanted an emotional reaction. They wanted me to engage, to argue, to plead. If I'm arguing, I'm negotiating. And you don't negotiate with terrorists. I deleted the draft. Instead, I printed the email. I printed the text messages. I went to my home office and printed the bank statements showing Greg's theft. I printed the credit card receipts for the Miami trip. I created a physical folder. I labeled it War. My phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. My father. Voicemail. Then the landline rang. They were relentless. I unplugged the landline. I put my cell on Do Not Disturb, allowing calls only from my inner circle, which, sadly, was a very short list. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of isolation. I had lost everyone. My husband, my sister, my parents, my extended family. Even the neighbors might turn on me once the gossip mill started. I was the villain in their story, and nothing I said would change that, because the truth was inconvenient for them. The truth required them to admit that Barb was a homewrecker and Greg was a failure. It was easier to make me the monster. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. I needed an ally. I needed someone who knew the real story. And then, as if summoned by my desperation, a yellow cab pulled up to my curb. A woman got out, wrestling a giant leopard print suitcase and a soggy umbrella. Zoe. My college roommate, my maid of honor, the one who told me on my wedding day, "I give this 5 years, but I've got your back." She lived in Boston. I hadn't called her yet because I was too ashamed. But here she was, marching up my front walk like a general arriving at the front lines. I opened the door, and before I could say a word, she dropped the suitcase, took one look at my tear-stained face, and said, "I saw Barbara's miracle baby post on Instagram. I'm here to help you bury the body." Metaphorically. Or literally, I brought a shovel. I burst into tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. Zoe didn't give me a gentle hug. She gave me a fierce one, like she was trying to hold my shattered pieces together through sheer force of will. She marched me into the living room, kicked off her shoes, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. "This is a special occasion," she declared, pouring 2 huge glasses. "This is the day you finally woke up." We sat on the floor, and I told her everything. The dinner, the trip, the text messages, the email from my father. When I showed her the email, Zoe didn't get sad. She got incandescently angry. She paced my living room, gesturing wildly with her wine glass. "Emotional distress for Barbara?" she yelled. "She slept with your husband. The only distress she should be feeling is the shame of being a horrible human being. And your parents? Veronica, I've been telling you they were toxic for 20 years. But this is a biblical-level betrayal. They said they'd testify against me," I said quietly. "They said I was abusive." "Let them," Zoe said, dropping to her knees in front of me and grabbing my shoulders. "Listen to me. Veronica, look at me. You are not the victim here. You are the bank, and they are terrified." "Terrified?" I sniffled. "They seem pretty confident." "It's a bluff," Zoe said. "Think about it. Greg has no job. Barbara has no job. Your parents are retired and living on a fixed income, plus whatever handouts you give them. If you turn off the money tap, they starve. They are attacking you because they need you to break before you realize you're holding all the cards." She was right. I had been so focused on the emotional wound that I hadn't looked at the strategic landscape. "He wants the house," I said. "He thinks it's marital property." "Is it?" Zoe asked. She knew I was meticulous about finances. "Veronica, please tell me you didn't put that loser's name on the deed." I managed a weak smile. "I bought the house before we were married. It's titled in the name of an LLC, Miller Holdings. I did it for liability protection because of my job." Zoe's eyes widened. "The prenup. Please tell me you made him sign a prenup." "I did," I said. My boss at the time insisted. "Greg signed it without reading it because he wanted to prove he didn't care about the money. But I haven't looked at it in 10 years. I don't remember the specific clauses." "Then we find it," Zoe commanded. "Tonight, we find every piece of paper, we build a fortress, and tomorrow, we launch the nuclear strike." We spent the next 4 hours turning my home office upside down. We found the prenuptial agreement in a safe in the back of the closet. We found the tax returns. We found the credit card statements I'd printed earlier. As we worked, Zoe kept poking holes in my reality. "He told you that you were barren?" she asked, sorting through receipts. "Veronica, didn't you tell me once that Greg refused to get tested?" I stopped. "Yes. He said he knew his guys were fine. He wouldn't go to the urologist. He said the problem was obviously me, because of my stress." "Right," Zoe snorted. Or maybe the problem is him. And Barb got knocked up by the trainer at her gym, and they're pinning it on Greg because he has a rich wife. I froze. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Greg wouldn't be that stupid. Greg is exactly that stupid, Zoe said. And Barbara is exactly that manipulative. We're adding a paternity test to your list of demands. By 3 a.m., we had a mountain of evidence. The consulting fees that were actually gifts to Barbara. The timeline of the affair based on credit card location data. The prenuptial agreement, which, upon rereading, contained a devastating infidelity clause. I looked at the pile of paper. It was ugly. It was a chronicle of my foolishness and their greed. But it was also ammunition. You know what you have to do, right? Zoe said, pouring the last of the wine. You can't just divorce him. You have to annihilate them. If you give them an inch, they will take everything. You have to go gray rock, no emotion, just the law. I know, I said. The grief was completely gone now, replaced by a cold resolve. I need a shark, not a family lawyer. A shark? Diana Sterling, Zoe said. She handled my cousin's divorce. She eats cheating husbands for breakfast. I'm making you an appointment for 9 a.m. I looked at my phone. Another text from my father. We are waiting for your response, Veronica. Don't make us come over there. This time, I typed a reply. I will respond through my attorney. Do not contact me again, or I will file for harassment. I hit send. Then I blocked his number. Good, Zoe said. Now, get some sleep. Tomorrow, we go to war. I lay down on the sofa, unable to go back to the bed Greg had defiled. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the plan. They wanted a villain. Fine. I would be a villain. I would be the worst nightmare they could possibly imagine. A woman who knew her worth and had the receipts to prove it. Diana Sterling's office was all glass and steel, perched on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. It screamed expensive, which was exactly what I needed. Diana herself was a woman in her 50s, with a razor-sharp bob and eyes that looked like they could burn through a bank vault. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. Zoe sat beside me, nodding in confirmation. When I was finished, Diana took a sip of water and looked at the stack of documents I'd brought. Good, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. Let's assess the damage. First, she picked up the prenup. She scanned it. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Who drafted this? My old corporate lawyer, I said. Is it valid? It's ironclad, Diana said. A small smile played on her lips. Section 4, Clause B. In the event of proven infidelity, the at-fault party forfeits all claims to any appreciation of marital property and waives all rights to alimony. And look at this definition of infidelity. It includes emotional affairs and financial malfeasance. She looked up at me. Greg didn't read this, did he? No. He said legal language gave him a headache, I admitted. Good for us, Diana said. Now, let's talk about the house. You said it's in an LLC. Miller Holdings LLC, I confirmed. I bought it 6 months before the wedding. And you never added his name to the LLC's articles of organization? No. Did you use joint funds to pay the mortgage? Sometimes, I faltered. From the joint account. Diana frowned. That creates a commingling issue. He could claim he contributed to the equity. But, I interrupted, pulling out the spreadsheet Zoe and I had made last night, I can prove that every single dollar in the joint account came from my salary. Greg hasn't contributed a dime in 5 years. In fact, these records show he was withdrawing joint funds for personal use, online gambling, gifts for Barbara, trips. Diana took the spreadsheet. Her eyes scanned the columns. He spent over $20,000 on online poker last year. Apparently, I said. I felt a flush of shame. I hadn't been checking the details. I was just paying the total bill. This is embezzlement, Diana stated flatly. He was taking funds entrusted to the marital partnership and diverting them for illicit purposes. We can argue that any equity he might claim was nullified by his theft. She leaned back in her chair. Veronica, here's the situation. Legally, you are in a very strong position. But practically, these things get messy. Judges hate family squabbles. If we go to court, it will take 2 years. Your parents will testify. It will be ugly. I don't care, I said. I want him left with nothing. I understand, Diana said. But there's a smarter way. We play on their greed. She laid out a plan. We would call it the honey trap. They think you're emotional and weak, Diana explained. They think you're desperate to keep the peace. So we're going to play into that. We will draft a settlement agreement. We will make it look like you're giving them exactly what they want, a quick divorce so they can get married and be a real family. But in the fine print, we will specify the division of assets based on the strict terms of the prenup and the LLC ownership. They won't sign that, Zoe said. They will if they don't read it, Diana countered, or if they think they're getting something better. We'll structure it so Greg waives his rights to the potential value of your company stock, which he thinks is huge, in exchange for you not suing him for his gambling debts and fraud. But I keep the house? I asked. Absolutely, Diana said. The house stays with the LLC. The agreement will state that Greg vacates the property upon final divorce decree, but we'll word it to sound like a temporary transition. We will let them believe they are winning right up until the ink is dry. It's risky, I said. It relies on their arrogance. Agreed, Diana said. But from what you've told me, Greg and your sister are not detail-oriented people. They're opportunists. They will see quick divorce and waiver of lawsuit, and they will sign. I remembered Greg's face as he'd left my house. You're just a bitter old hag with your spreadsheets. He underestimated me. He always had. Let's do it, I said. One more thing, Diana added. We need to secure your assets immediately. Cancel all the credit cards, freeze the joint accounts, reroute your paycheck today, right now. He'll notice, I said. He'll freak out. Let him, Diana said coldly. He was spending your money to date your sister. The party is over. Walking out of Diana's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had a plan. I had a team. I went straight to the bank. I sat with the branch manager and systematically dismantled the financial life Greg and I had built. I closed the credit cards. I removed him as an authorized user. I transferred the bulk of our savings into a new account, solely in my name. As I walked out of the bank, my phone buzzed. A notification from the credit card app. Transaction declined. Starbucks, $8.50. He was buying coffee for 2. A latte for him, probably, and a decaf for Barbara. And for the first time, the card didn't work. I smiled. It was a small, petty victory, but it tasted sweet. Sorry, Greg, I whispered to the phone. Looks like you're paying cash today. But the real test was yet to come. I had to go to them. I had to look them in the eyes and pretend to be broken. All while holding the knife that was about to sever the cord, I texted my father. I'm ready to talk. Let's meet. The trap was set. Now I just had to make sure I didn't throw up when I saw them. The cafe I chose for the meeting was neutral territory. A sterile corporate chain with fluorescent lighting and jazz music that was just a little too loud, located halfway between my parents' house and my office. I arrived 15 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because I needed to get into character. I checked my reflection in the dark window. I had worn my oldest cardigan, the one with the pilling on the sleeve, and skipped my usual under-eye concealer. I let my shoulders slump. I needed to look like a defeated wife, a woman who had lost everything and was desperate to salvage a shred of dignity. Diana sat next to me, crisp and professional, but she had softened her usual shark-like gaze. Remember, she whispered, sliding the thick document across the table, you're not a CFO today. You're a heartbroken sister. Let them think they're doing you a favor by signing this. I nodded, my stomach in knots. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. It was the feeling of a roller coaster clacking its way to the top of the big drop. Greg and my father arrived together. Greg looked tired but smug, wearing the blazer I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. My father walked with that stiff, righteous posture he adopted when he felt he was the moral authority in the room. They sat down without shaking hands. Greg wouldn't meet my eyes. Veronica, my father began, his voice rumbling slightly. I'm glad you've come to your senses. We don't want a war. We just want what's best for the baby. I know, Dad, I said, letting my voice crack just a little. I stared down at my hands, twisting the wedding ring I was still wearing for effect. I've been thinking a lot about what Mom said, about being the bigger sister. Greg looked up, his interest piqued. So, you agree to the terms? Diana slid in smoothly. Veronica agrees that a protracted legal battle would be detrimental to everyone's health. She is willing to grant an immediate divorce. She is also willing to waive her right to sue you, Greg, for certain accounting irregularities we've discovered. Greg flinched. Irregularities? I told you, those were consulting expenses. Whatever the case, Diana continued with a wave of her hand, Veronica is willing to let it go. In the spirit of moving forward, I looked at Greg, mustering all the sadness I could. I don't want to fight you, Greg. I loved you. If Barbara is who you want, if she can give you the family I couldn't. I paused, dabbing at a fake tear. Then I won't stand in your way. My father let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing. Good girl, Veronica. I knew you had a good heart. However, Diana said, pushing the document toward them, to make this legally binding and fast, so you can marry Barbara before the baby is born, we need to sign a settlement agreement today. It grants the divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. It states that each party keeps the assets held in their sole name and waives all claims to the other's future earnings. Greg frowned, eyeing the thick stack of paper. What about the house? The email said, I get the house. The agreement states that you will retain residency at the Maple Street address, Diana said carefully, using very specific wording, and Veronica will vacate the premises. It also includes a clause where Veronica agrees not to seek repayment of the $50,000 in marital funds you spent on outside entanglements. Greg's eyes widened at the number. He glanced at my father. He knew if that number came out in court, he'd look like a thief. What about alimony? Greg asked, greedy to the last. I can't pay alimony, Greg, I whispered, but I'm giving up the house. I'm giving you a home for your baby. Isn't that enough? My father nudged Greg. Take the deal, son. A house in this suburb is worth a fortune. She's giving you the equity. Don't push it. Greg looked at the document. He flipped quickly through the pages. I held my breath. If he read Section 12, pertaining to the property rights of third-party entities or LLCs, the game was over. But he was skimming. He was looking for dollar signs and the word house. He stopped at the signature page. He picked up the pen. This means it's over? He asked, looking at me. No takebacks? You won't come after my business ideas? I won't touch your business ideas, Greg, I said. It was an easy promise to make, since he didn't have any. And you'll leave us alone? I just want to disappear, I said quietly. He smirked. The victory was in his eyes. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won the house, the girl, and his freedom, all while sticking me with the bill. Right now, as I watch his hand hover over the paper, I know there is no turning back. I'm about to blow up my entire life just to build a new one. My heart is pounding against my ribs, not with grief, but with the adrenaline of the kill. If you're still listening to this story, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you're amazing and that you're with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me. Drop a 1 so I can see you. Now, let's see what happens when the ink hits the paper. Greg signed. The sound of the pen scratching on the paper was loud in the quiet cafe. Scratch, scratch, the sound of a man signing his own death warrant. My father signed as a witness, beaming as if he were signing a peace treaty that ended a war he started. There, Dad said, capping the pen and pushing the documents back to Diana. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now we can all move on. Yes, I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I forced them to hold. I'll be by to pack the rest of my things this weekend. You can have the keys on Monday. Monday works? Greg said, already pulling out his phone, probably to text Barbara the good news. Make sure you leave the washer and dryer. Barb's going to have a lot of baby clothes to do. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Of course, the washer and dryer stay. I walked out of the cafe with Diana, maintaining my defeated slouch until we were around the corner and out of sight. The moment we were clear, I straightened my spine and took a deep, clean breath of the damp city air. Did we get it? I asked Diana, my voice firm. Diana held up the folder. A wicked smile spread across her face. We got it. He waived further discovery. He waived alimony. And most importantly, he signed an acknowledgement that all assets held by third-party legal entities are excluded from the marital estate. He thinks the house is a marital asset, I said, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in my throat. He thought, Diana corrected. Legally, he just agreed that Miller Holdings LLC is a third-party entity and he has no claim to it. He just evicted himself. The weekend was a surreal blur of method acting. I went back to the house, my house, and packed. But I didn't pack everything. I packed my clothes, my jewelry, my personal papers, and the things that held sentimental value only to me. My parents came over on Sunday to supervise, to make sure I wasn't stealing anything that belonged to the baby. Barbara was there, sitting on my sofa, eating my snacks, pointing out to Greg where to hang a tacky new painting she'd bought. "Veronica," Barbara called as I taped up a box of books. "Leave the dice and vacuum. My back has been killing me. I can't be lugging a heavy one around." I looked at her. She was glowing with the triumph of the golden child who had finally won the grand prize. She had my husband, my house, and my future. Or so she thought. "Of course, Barb," I said. "And the espresso machine," she added. "Greg says you make great lattes. I'll need to learn." "Leave it." My mother walked into the room, shaking her head. "See, Veronica? It feels good to give, doesn't it? You have so much. It's only right to share with those less fortunate." "It's clarifying," I said. "Well, don't look so sour about it," Mom chided. "You're a free woman now. You can focus on your career. That's what you always wanted, isn't it? No husband to cook for, no kids to worry about, just you and your money." The contempt in her voice when she said money was palpable, yet she was standing in a house my money bought, wearing a sweater my money paid for. "Yes, Mom," I said, lifting the last box. "Just me and my money." I walked to the door. Greg was standing there, holding out his hand for the keys I was supposed to give him. "No hard feelings, Veronica," he said, offering a hand I refused to shake. "Hopefully we can be friends, for the sake of the family." "Friends?" I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. "Goodbye, Greg. Enjoy the house. Really soak it in." I handed him a set of keys. They were the old keys. I'd already scheduled a locksmith for Monday morning, 1 hour after the eviction notice was set to be served, but he didn't need to know that yet. I walked to my car, a rental, because I had stashed my company car in a garage Diana recommended. I drove away, watching them in the rearview mirror, my parents waving, Greg and Barbara kissing on the doorstep, a perfect picture of a happy family. I drove 2 blocks, pulled over, and threw up in some bushes. The act was over. The nausea of pretending to be weak, of pretending to accept their abuse, finally caught up with me. I wiped my mouth, took a sip of water, and looked at myself in the mirror. "You did it," I whispered. "Now burn it all to the ground." The next 30 days were a lesson in patience. There's a waiting period for divorce, even an uncontested one, but because we had filed the settlement agreement immediately, the clock was ticking toward the final decree. During that time, I lived in a corporate apartment owned by my company. I went to work. I smiled in meetings. I ignored the posts Barbara put on Instagram. "So happy to be nesting with my soulmate in our forever home." Caption on a picture of her feet on my coffee table. Nursery coming along. A picture of Greg painting my guest room, a garish shade of blue. Every picture was a piece of evidence I saved, just in case. But the real weapon was the paperwork Diana had filed. Let me explain exactly how the trap worked, because if you are a woman with assets, you need to know this. 10 years ago, a mentor told me, "Veronica, never own anything in your own name if you can help it. Put it in an LLC. It protects you from lawsuits, and it protects you from life." So, Miller Holdings LLC owned the house on Maple Street. It owned the car. It owned my investment accounts. When I married Greg, he signed the prenup. He was lazy, so he didn't read it. The prenup said any asset held by a separate legal entity prior to the marriage remains separate property, regardless of who lives in it. But the absolute beauty of Diana's legal maneuver was the infidelity clause's forfeiture provision, combined with the settlement agreement Greg had just signed. The agreement said, Gregory Miller agrees to vacate the marital residence upon the final divorce decree becoming effective, unless a separate lease agreement is signed with the property owner. Greg thought he was the new property owner because of our verbal agreement and my gift of the house. He thought the owner was us, or him. He didn't understand that the owner was a corporation, and a corporation doesn't have feelings. A corporation doesn't have a sister. A corporation only has contracts. And since Greg had no lease agreement with Miller Holdings LLC, the moment the judge stamped final on our divorce, Greg became a trespasser. "This is brutal," Zoe said one night as we drank wine in my temporary apartment. "It is the most beautiful and brutal thing I have ever seen." "It had to be," I said, looking out at the city lights. "If I had just fought them, a judge might have given him the house just so the baby would have a roof over its head. Judges are sympathetic to kids. But this way, he gave it up himself. He agreed to leave. He just didn't know when." "What about the money?" Zoe asked. "Joint accounts are closed," I said. "Credit cards canceled. But I left one account open, the one tied to the auto pay for the house's utilities." "Why?" "Because I want the lights to stay on until after the wedding." I smiled. "I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel safe." "You're terrifying," Zoe laughed. "I'm just a CFO," I shrugged. "I manage risk." On day 29, the judge signed the decree. I was officially divorced. I was officially single. And legally, Greg was officially a squatter. Diana called me. "It's signed. The eviction notice is prepared. The locksmith is on standby. The movers are booked to put your furniture in storage." "Wait," I said. "Don't send the movers yet. Let them have the wedding first. You want them to have their reception in your house?" Diana asked, bewildered. "No," I said. "Their reception is at a banquet hall, because they're cheap, but they'll be coming back to the house for their wedding night. That's when we strike." "That's cold, Veronica." "They stole my husband and tried to steal my future," I said. "Cold is the only temperature I have left." I hung up. I looked at the calendar. Saturday. The wedding was on Saturday. I was sending a gift. It wasn't a toaster. It was a process server. I obviously did not attend the wedding, but in the age of social media, you don't need to be present to witness a train wreck. You just need a burner account. Greg and Barbara's wedding was a testament to their delusions. My cousin Mike, who was secretly on my side but feared my mother's wrath, was giving me a real-time report via text. "Barb is in white. Very white. And a tiara. Looks like a melted cake topper. Greg is drunk, telling everyone how his investments are expanding. Your mom is crying during the toast about how true love always finds a way. I think I'm going to be sick." I sat in my apartment, scrolling through the photos. There they were. My ex-husband and my sister, cutting a cake that I knew my father had paid for. They looked triumphant. They looked like they had gotten away with murder. Barbara's caption under her post: "Finally, Mrs. Miller. So happy to start our lives in our forever home. Number soulmate. Number happy. Number sorry. Not sorry." That number sorry not sorry hashtag was the final straw. She wasn't just happy, she was gloating. She wanted me to see it. She wanted me to know she had won. I looked at the clock. It was 9 p.m. The reception was winding down. Soon they would be heading back to Maple Street. I made a call to the private security firm Diana had hired. "Initiate Phase 2, I said. "Understood, Miss Miller. We are in position." The locksmith was done. The notices were posted. I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it made my hands shake. This was it. While they were slow dancing, a team was changing every lock on my house. While they were tossing the bouquet, a process server was taping a bright orange eviction notice to the front door, the back door, and the garage. And while they were getting into their just-married car, my father's sedan, since I'd repossessed the company car, my security team was parking across the street, ready to enforce the law. I imagined their drive. They were probably laughing. Greg was probably loosening his tie, thinking about carrying his pregnant bride over the threshold of the house he'd pushed me out of. He was probably thinking about how clever he was, how he'd beaten the system. He didn't know the system had been rigged against him from the start. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I didn't need alcohol to numb this. I wanted to feel every second of it. "Happy wedding day, Barb," I toasted the empty room. Welcome to reality. My phone buzzed. It was Mike again. They just left, headed your way. Good luck, Veronica. Give 'em hell. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to stay in the apartment. I needed to see this. I drove to my old neighborhood and parked 3 houses down, hidden in the shadow of a large oak tree. I watched the street. It was quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black. My house was dark. I had remotely cut the power via the smart home app 5 minutes ago. Headlights swept down the street. The car pulled into the driveway. It was them. The show was about to begin. The scene unfolded with cinematic precision. Greg's car door opened, and he stumbled out, still in his tuxedo, looking a little unsteady on his feet. He walked around to open the door for Barbara. She emerged, her white dress dragging on the wet pavement, clutching her stomach theatrically. They walked up the path to the front porch. I rolled down my window an inch, just enough to hear. "Why are the lights off?" Barbara whined, her voice shrill in the night air. "I told you to leave the porch light on." "I did," Greg mumbled. "Bulb must have burned out. Relax, baby, we're home." He fumbled in his pocket for the keys. The keys I had given him, the old keys. He slid the key into the lock. He turned. Nothing. He jiggled it, pulled it out, wiped it on his pants, and tried again. He put his shoulder to the door. It didn't budge. "What is wrong with you?" Barbara snapped. "Open the door." "I have to pee." "It's stuck," Greg grunted. "Must be the humidity." He tried again, turning harder. "Damn it!" Greg yelled, kicking the door. That's when the motion sensor floodlights I'd remotely activated suddenly blazed to life, bathing them in blinding white light, and that's when they saw it. The bright orange piece of paper, taped directly at eye level. An eviction notice and a no trespassing warning. Greg ripped it from the door, squinting to read it. "What is this?" Barbara asked, peering over his shoulder. It says we're trespassing," Greg stammered. "Miller Holdings, LLC. Veronica," he roared my name. "Veronica." He turned, scanning the darkness, spoiling for a fight. "I know it's you. This is my house." "You can't kick me out." He picked up a decorative rock from the garden and started toward the living room window. "Don't do it, Greg," I whispered to myself. Before he could throw it, the unmarked sedan across the street lit up with flashing red and blue lights. 2 private security officers, in uniform but with arresting authority, stepped out of the car. "Drop the rock, sir," one of them commanded, his hand on his sidearm. Greg froze. "Officers, thank God. My ex-wife, she's locked us out. This is my house. I have my pregnant wife here. You have to let us in." The officer walked up the path, calm and imposing. "Sir, step away from the door. Can I see your identification?" Greg fumbled for his wallet. "I live here. 42 Maple Street. Check your records." The officer looked at the ID, then at a tablet he was holding. "I have a deed here listing the owner as Miller Holdings, LLC, and I have a signed court order from yesterday stating that a Mr. Gregory Miller agreed to vacate the premises immediately upon divorce." "That was a formality," Greg yelled, spittle flying. "We had a verbal agreement. She gave it to me." "A verbal agreement does not override a court order, sir," the officer said. "And since you are no longer a resident and you just attempted to break a window, you are currently trespassing. You need to leave." "Leave?" Barbara shrieked. "Leave to where? We live here. All our stuff is inside. My baby's crib is in there." "Your personal property has been packed and moved to a storage unit," the officer read from his tablet. "Here is the address and the key to the unit." He held out a small brass key to Greg. "You packed my things?" Barbara looked horrified. "You touched my underwear? This is illegal. I'm calling my dad." "You can call whomever you like," the officer said, "but you cannot stay here. If you are not in your car and leaving within the next 3 minutes, I will arrest you for trespassing and attempted vandalism." Greg looked at the house. He looked at the orange sticker. He looked at the useless key in his hand. Reality was finally cutting through the alcohol and the arrogance. He owned nothing. He was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. "Veronica!" He screamed into the night again, staring right at the oak tree where I was hiding, though he couldn't see me. You planned this? You let us plan a wedding, knowing you were going to do this?" I smiled. Yes, I did. "Sir." Final warning, the officer said, stepping closer. In the car. Now. Barbara started sobbing. It was a loud, ugly wail. My wedding night! You ruined my wedding night. Greg shoved her toward the car. Shut up, Barb. Just get in the car. Don't push me, she screamed back. This is your fault. You said you had it handled. You said she was a pushover. She tricked me. They screamed at each other as they scrambled back into my father's sedan. Greg slammed the door, backed out of the driveway, and sped off, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. The officers watched them go, then turned off their lights and returned to their post. Silence fell over Maple Street. I leaned back in my seat, my heart hammering, but my soul was singing. They were homeless on their wedding night. But I wasn't done yet. The house was just the shelter. Now I had to take away the food. The next phase of my plan relied on the fact that Greg and Barbara were creatures of habit and entitlement. I knew exactly where they would go. There was only one luxury hotel in town they considered worthy of them, the Ritz-Carlton. I drove there, keeping a safe distance. Sure enough, my father's car was parked out front, Greg storming into the lobby, Barbara trailing behind, her white dress now muddy from her driveway tantrum. I parked and slipped into the lobby, positioning myself behind a large potted palm where I could see the front desk. Greg slammed his hand on the marble counter. I need a suite. The presidential, if you have it. My house. We have a plumbing emergency. Lying to the end. The concierge typed something. Certainly, sir. We do have the suite available. It's $1,500 a night, plus tax. May I have a credit card for incidentals? Greg pulled out his black card, the one that used to be tied to my corporate bonuses, the one I had canceled at 9:01 a.m. that very morning. He swiped it. The concierge frowned. I'm sorry, sir. This card has been declined. Run it again, Greg snapped. It's a premium card. There's no limit. The system says the card has been reported lost or stolen, she said, her voice a decibel quieter. Stolen. Greg's face flushed. Here, try this one. He handed over the joint card. Declined. Greg started to sweat. He patted his pockets. He pulled out a debit card, his personal one, the one tied to the account where he kept his consulting money. This one works, he said confidently. The concierge ran the card. She waited. She looked up, a hint of pity in her eyes. Sir, there are insufficient funds in the account. What? Greg yelled. There was $5,000 in there yesterday. There was. But remember the gambling debt? The one I'd stopped paying? The casino had a lien. The moment the joint protections were stripped by the divorce decree, the creditors had pounced and seized his personal account. Diana had tipped them off. Barbara walked up, wiping smeared mascara from her face. Just use my card, Greg. God. She rummaged in her purse and produced a card. It was the supplementary card from my account. Ma'am, that card is also invalid, the concierge said. The silence in the lobby was deafening. People were staring. A bride in a dirty dress and a groom with no money. We have cash, Greg stammered. He opened his wallet. He had maybe $300. Not enough for a motel on the edge of town, let alone the Ritz-Carlton. I have to make a call, Greg said, his voice trembling. He pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. I watched my phone light up in my purse. I let it ring. He dialed my parents. Dad, I heard his voice crack. She kicked us out. She canceled the cards. We're at the Ritz. We can't pay. We have nowhere to go. I couldn't hear my father's reply, but I saw Greg's face fall. What do you mean you can't come? Yes, I know it's late, but Barb is pregnant. Fine. We'll come to you. He hung up and looked at Barbara. Your dad said we can sleep on the pull-out sofa in his den. The sofa? Barbara shrieked. I'm a bride. I'm pregnant. I can't sleep on a sofa. Well, we can't sleep here, Greg yelled back, losing control. We have no money, Barb. She took it all. She took every last damn cent. You told me you had your own money, Barbara accused, shoving him. You said you were a tycoon. I was spending her money, Greg confessed, his voice echoing under the high ceilings. It was all her money. Are you happy now? The concierge cleared her throat. Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing the other guests. They walked out of the hotel. The walk of shame to end all walks of shame. No luxury suite, no champagne, just a cold drive back to my parents' house to sleep on a lumpy couch in a room that smelled of old newspapers. I walked up to the lobby bar. "Champagne," I told the bartender. "The most expensive glass you have." "Celebrating something?" he asked. "Freedom," I said. "And justice." Monday morning. I walked into my office building feeling like I was walking on air. The security guards nodded to me. My assistant, oblivious to the weekend's drama, handed me my coffee. "You have a busy schedule," she said. "And your family is in the lobby? They're demanding to see you." "Send them to conference room B," I said calmly, and I called Diana. "Tell her to bring the folder. Oh, and have Mr. Henderson from legal join us." I touched up my makeup. Sharp eyeliner, red lipstick, a power suit. I was no longer Veronica, the victim. I was the master of my own universe. I walked into conference room B. They were all there. My mother, looking exhausted. My father, furious. Greg, in the same clothes as yesterday, looking unwashed. Barbara, crying quietly in the corner. "Monster!" my mother shrieked as soon as I entered. "How could you? On their wedding night!" I sat at the head of the table. "Please, sit down. We have business to discuss." "Business?" Greg slammed his fist on the table. "You stole my house. You stole my money." "I reclaimed my property," I corrected, "and I ceased subsidizing your fraud." "We'll sue you," my father yelled. "We'll tell everyone what you did." "Tell them what?" I asked. "That I evicted my ex-husband from a home he didn't own, that I stopped paying for my grown sister? Go ahead. But before you do, you might want to look at this." Diana walked in, followed by our corporate counsel. She placed a thick binder on the table. "This," I said, tapping the binder, "is a financial audit of the last 5 years. Greg, you embezzled over $100,000 from our joint accounts for gambling and unauthorized gifts. That's a felony." Greg turned pale. "And Barbara," I looked at my sister. "Here are the receipts for the jewelry, the trips, the clothes, all paid for with stolen money. In the eyes of the law, that makes you an accessory to fraud. Receipt of stolen goods." Barbara stopped crying. I didn't know." "Ignorance is not a defense," Diana said sharply. "Now," I continued, standing up, "here is my offer. I will not press criminal charges against Greg. I will not sue Barbara for the return of the assets. I will not sue you, Mom and Dad, for the money I loaned you over the years that you forgot to pay back." My parents shrank in their seats. "In return," I said, "you will all sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will never contact me again. You will never come to my office. You will never come to my home. And you," I pointed at Greg, "will acknowledge that the debt you owe the casino and the IRS is your debt alone." "The IRS?" Greg squeaked. "Oh, yes." I smiled. "I filed an innocent spouse claim this morning. The IRS knows you failed to declare that gambling income. They'll be in touch." Greg put his head in his hands. He was finished. "You're destroying us," my mother whispered. "We're family." "No," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You were parasites. I was the host. I am simply curing the infection." "What about the baby?" Barbara wailed. "Your nephew. He needs a home." I looked at Barbara. I looked at her stomach. And I played my final card, the one I had been saving. "About that baby," I said, pulling the last sheet from the binder. "Greg, remember when we were trying IVF? You refused to get tested?" Greg looked up, confused. "So?" "So, I had the doctor run a test on the sample you gave for that at-home kit we tried first. I found the results in your desk. You'd hidden them. I slid the paper to him. You have a genetic condition, Greg. Azoospermia. You have a 0 sperm count. You're sterile." The room was utterly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Greg looked at the paper. Then he looked at Barbara. The color drained from Barbara's face. She looked like a ghost. "Barb." Greg's voice was a dangerous whisper. "Barb. Whose baby is it?" I, Barbara stammered. "That test is wrong. Veronica faked it." "It's from the clinic, Greg," I said. "Call them." Greg stood up. The realization was dawning on him. He had blown up his life, lost his rich wife, lost the house, and gone into debt for a child that wasn't his. "Who is he?" Greg roared, grabbing Barbara's arm. "It was one time," Barbara screamed. "With my trainer. It didn't mean anything. I needed you to marry me. I needed the stability." "You set me up," Greg yelled. "You ruined my life for some bastard child." He lunged for her. Security was on him in an instant, restraining him. "Get them out," I told the guards. "All of them." As they were dragged out, Greg was screaming curses. Barbara was howling. My parents looked old and defeated. I felt nothing. Not joy, not sadness, just quiet. The quiet of a clean slate. The revelation about the baby was the nuclear bomb that vaporized what was left of their alliance. I didn't have to do anything else. I just watched the fallout from a safe distance. Greg was arrested for assault that day in my office. He spent a night in a cell. When he got out, he had nowhere to go. My parents refused to take him back in. After all, he was no longer the father of their grandchild. He was just a broke, violent man who had humiliated them. Barbara's life imploded. My parents, faced with the shame of a daughter pregnant by a random gym trainer and the loss of their rich son-in-law fantasy, turned on her. "How could you be so stupid?" I heard my mother scream at her over the phone again. "Thanks for the updates, Mike. You had a golden goose and you killed it." They didn't care about the morality. They cared that the grift had failed. Greg filed for an annulment based on fraud, claiming Barbara had tricked him into marriage. He also tried to sue me again, representing himself because he couldn't afford a lawyer. The judge threw out the case in 5 minutes and ordered him to pay my legal fees. Since he couldn't pay, he had to declare bankruptcy. And the baby? The trainer turned out to be a 20-year-old college student with no money and no interest in being a father. Barbara was facing single motherhood with 0 assets, living in her childhood bedroom, listening to her mother complain daily about what a financial drain she was. About 2 months later, I got a letter from Greg. It was forwarded to my office. "Veronica, I know I messed up. I was weak. Barbara manipulated me. She played on my insecurities. I never stopped loving you." I was confused. "Please, let's talk. I'm living out of my car. I have nothing. You were the only good thing that ever happened to me. Please give me a second chance." I read it twice. 10 years ago, I would have cried. I would have thought, he's hurting. I need to help him. But I looked at the handwriting, at the same hand that had signed away my dignity for a house he didn't own. I took a red marker. I wrote "Return to sender" on the envelope and dropped it in the shredder. I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't care. He was a stranger, a lesson learned the hard way. The implosion of the Miller clan was total. My parents, without my monthly assistance, couldn't afford their lifestyle. They had to put their suburban house up for sale, the house where I grew up, the house where I was always second best. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Barbara had to get a job, a real job. She started working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Mike told me she looks 10 years older and complains to anyone who will listen about how her evil sister stole her inheritance, but no one listens. People in town saw the police cars. They know the truth. Greg left the city. Rumor has it he moved back to his hometown to live with his brother, working in a call center. I maintained absolute no contact. I changed my number. I moved into a new home, a sleek, modern penthouse downtown, far from the suburbs. I sold the house on Maple Street to a nice young couple. I didn't want the memories. One rainy afternoon, 6 months later, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. It was inevitable in a city this size, I suppose. She looked fragile. Her hair wasn't its usual perfect blonde. Gray roots were showing. She saw me and stopped her cart. "Veronica," she said, her voice wavering. I stopped. I didn't run. I stood my ground. "Cynthia." "We miss you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Your father, he hasn't been well. His heart. We could use some help." There it was. The hook. The guilt. His heart. Help. I looked at this woman who had told me to give my husband to my sister, who had called me greedy, who had valued me only as long as I was useful. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said politely. "Your insurance covers cardiac conditions. You should give them a call." "Veronica," she gasped. "We're your family." "No," I said, leaning in close so she could hear every word. "You made your choice. You chose Barbara. You chose the lie. You don't get to come back to the truth just because the lie stopped paying the bills. I am your mother. You are my egg donor, I said, and my tormentor. I am done paying for my own humiliation. I walked past her. I didn't look back. I bought my groceries, expensive cheese, a nice bottle of wine, things I like, and walked out into the rain. But this time, the rain felt clean. It felt like a baptism. It's been a year since that dinner from hell. I'm writing this from a balcony on the Amalfi Coast. I took a sabbatical, the first of my life. I'm not working. I'm just living. The lawsuit is a distant memory. The pain is a scar, faded to white. I met someone here. His name is Luca. He's an architect. He doesn't know about my money, and he doesn't care. He likes that I'm smart. He likes that I beat him at chess. Yesterday, we were sitting by the ocean, and he asked me, "Veronica, why do you always check the bill so carefully?" I smiled. Because I've learned that if you don't audit your own life, someone else will embezzle your happiness. I thought of Barbara, probably changing a diaper in a cramped apartment, bitter and angry. I thought of Greg, answering phones somewhere in the heartland, dreaming of the life he threw away. They wanted everything. They ended up with nothing. I wanted nothing but love, and I ended up with everything. My freedom, my fortune, and finally, myself. I realized the shadow sister was gone. I wasn't the shadow. I was the sun. I had just been letting them stand in my light. I took a sip of my wine, the same kind of wine I drank the night Zoe told me to fight back. To the auditors, I whispered to the sea, and the sea whispered back, "You won." If you are going through something like this, if you are the one who always gives and never gets, listen to me. Stop. Close the account. Change the locks. You are worth more than what you can provide for other people. Don't be the shadow sister. Be the master of your own life. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it was necessary. If you enjoyed watching me dismantle the people who tried to dismantle me, please like this video and subscribe. And don't forget to drop a 1 if you made it to the end. You are my real family now. Be strong and keep the receipts. And so, as the waves of the Amalfi Coast whispered victory to Veronica, we are reminded of a powerful truth. Self-worth is not defined by how much we give to others, but by how fiercely we protect our own light. Her journey was not just about reclaiming her assets or her freedom. It was about rediscovering her power, her value, and the courage to stand tall in the face of betrayal. Veronica's story teaches us that resilience is born not from avoiding pain, but from facing it head-on and using it as a catalyst for growth. In life, we may encounter those who take advantage of our kindness or mistake it for weakness. But true strength lies in knowing when to draw the line, when to say enough, and when to prioritize our own happiness. Veronica's transformation from the shadow sister to the master of her own life reminds us that we are not defined by the expectations or manipulations of others. We are defined by our ability to rise, rebuild, and shine brighter than ever before. What did you take away from this story? Share your thoughts below, or simply write "well done" if this reflection resonated with you. Let's celebrate the power within each of us.